today's video, we are traveling across the world to gather steel and rock from the great mountains of Japan to build our very own katana sword forged in... Actually, no, we're just going to be going to the local hardware store and building a super simple katana with my kids. But it's going to be fun, I promise, so stick around. So after a quick Google search and browsing through Wikipedia briefly, we found out how long the traditional katana swords were, but I went ahead and customized it so that it fit my kids a little bit better, even though I would be using it occasionally as well. I went ahead and built it to their size. So after watching the movie Last Samurai with Tom Cruise and doing a bit of, cold weather meditating. Let's go. I think we were finally ready to build this katana.
Let's do it.
Since this is a toy sword, you can use pretty much any wood out there, but we went ahead and used white oak. This was readily available at the local lumber store, and it is a hardwood, so it isn't going to dent as easily as we're swinging it around slaying dragons. So to get started, we went ahead and measured the length that we wanted the sword to be on the wood and cut it down to size. And once we had the board cut down to size, I took a Sharpie and drew in over our sketch marks the shape of the katana sword so that I could use the jigsaw to cut it out. Now, I know there are endless ways to build a katana sword out of wood, and this way is probably the most simple way to do it. But this was just a fun, quick project that me and my kids can knock out in an hour or two in an evening. Or if you're a nerd like me and you like wood and swords, then go ahead and build one for yourself. So as you can see here, I'm using my extremely sophisticated and high-end jigsaw to cut out the katana that we have traced on this piece of white oak. Now traditionally, katanas don't have the oversized crossguards like the one I'm cutting onto this piece of wood, but the samurai that was going to be using this requested an oversized one. I think he was tired of his fingers getting hit so much during the fight, so I had no choice but to add an oversized crossguard to this katana. And I'm sure all of you watching understand. Yeah, look at that. Now, I hope all of you watching are paying close attention to this next part, because the ingenuity I'm about to display, I'm sure is going to just blow your mind. If you're anything like me, and you've somehow made it to 30 years old without having any sort of decent workbench in your garage, this is how I was able to make a quick makeshift workbench just to get us through this short, fun project. Took an old 4x6 I had laying around the garage, took some clamps, clamped it to this folding table I had, and then I mounted a $30 vice grip that I got from Harbor Freight to the top of this 4x6 with some old metal roofing screws. And there you have it. We have ourselves a nice little makeshift workbench that can hold our katana, and we can work on it safely while we get it finished. Well, as safe as I can make it. This setup still wasn't the most stable, and I don't think my daughter approved of it. So stay tuned, we're definitely going to be adding a DIY workbench build to this channel very soon. Also, check out the dedication and focus from this girl over here. Man, can't wait to see what she's making. So the last katana I made, I used a jigsaw and just angled the saw blade to make the angle on the katana sword and shape it how I wanted. This didn't turn out as smooth or as well as I would have hoped, so this time I'm trying something a little bit different. I got this Master Force 36 grit flap sanding disc and put it on my angle grinder, and we're going to try to shape the sword using this. Now before I started using the angle grinder to shape the blade, I took a pencil and made a center mark all the way down the entire length of the sword. That way I knew not to cross over this line. It was a good reference point so that at the end I would have a nice straight blade. Now this next step probably took the longest out of all the steps, but all in all it really didn't take that long. We took about 30 to 45 minutes to just get the blade shape to how we liked it. We'd move it back and forth and up and down. We'd reverse it on both sides to get an equal angle. Having this vise to hold it in place while we did this was super helpful. Last time we just used a couple clamps and clamped it to the table. So I would highly recommend using a vise if you're going to shape a katana blade like we are doing here. After I got the blade shaped to something I was happy with, I had to call the little samurai over and get his approval. I think I did a pretty good job. He seemed pretty happy with it. Next, I took a router with a 1/4 inch roundover bit and gave some shape to the handle. I also used the flap disc to round over the crossguard. And once we got it to a shape that we really liked, it was time to move on to the next step, and that is something that every woodworker absolutely loves, and that is sanding. I started with 80 grit sandpaper. I will say that the flap disc did leave a lot of lines and grooves in the wood, and I wanted to get this all smoothed out before I moved into 120 or 220 grit sandpaper. So this 80 grit was the right man for the job. So after doing a rough sanding with the 80 grit over the entire sword and getting rid of all those grooves and notches that flap disc left, I wiped the entire sword down with a clean rag to get rid of all the sawdust, and then I moved up to 120 grit. So after an entire pass on the sword again with the 120, I wiped the sword down again with a clean rag to get rid of the sawdust, and I moved up to 220 grit. Once I got it nice and smooth all over, I took a damp rag and water popped it. This is basically just raising the grain of the wood before you do the final sanding. Using this water popping method will just make it a lot smoother at the very end. So after I wiped it down with the rag, I let it sit and dry completely before coming back again with the 220 and giving it just one final quick sanding. So while we're waiting for the wood to dry, I'm going to come on inside and make my own finish. I wanted to make something non-toxic and food grade, so this is a recipe I found actually on YouTube. A lot of people will use this to finish their cutting boards. I'm going to take 1 part beeswax and 4 parts white mineral oil, mix it together, and then rub it on the wood later. So I'll measure 1 ounce of beeswax on my little food scale here, and then I'll take 4 ounces of white mineral oil, put that into a pot, turn the stove top to medium, and then stir it until we get it to melt and mix. And then I'm going to pour it into this nice little fancy jar my wife said I could use. I'm going to let the finish cool down while we go outside into the garage and do that final sanding on the Katana. We're just going to take the 220 and knock down any of those fibers that we raised when we did the water popping earlier. And we made it to the final fitting. So I called the little samurai over again. He gave it a few swings, and I think he was liking it quite a bit. I did notice though while he was swinging it that the tip was a little too sharp, so I went back and just took the sander and curved that tip down a little bit, made it a little bit more dull, and well, at least I tried to. And after all that, I gave it one last thorough wipe down and left this thing smoother than a politician at a fundraising dinner. We headed back inside, took out the finish we had just made, and began to wipe down the entire sword very thoroughly. And after we had the entire sword coated in this finish, I just took a clean rag and wiped off all the excess. There it is, the custom here, Katana.
Custom Katana.
And now, well, you may be thinking, there's only one thing left to do. Just like that, the little samurai was victorious. Maybe in the next video, it might be wise for me to make a wooden suit of armor. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next one.